When we were looking at the Bible, we really wanted to focus on what kinds of diseases were mentioned and how people thought that they were cured. We also wanted to look at the context of these diseases and where people thought they came from, such as from God or from Satan. It was also important that we compared the Old Testament, taken from the Hebrew Bible, to the New Testament, which is exclusive to the Christian religion, and see what was different and what was similar. To collect data from the Bible, we used a combined technique of data mining using a source called Voyant for text mining, looking through other sources to find hints as to where the Old Testament we would find information, and close reading for context. We took all of the findings and put them into an Excel spreadsheet that we would later use to create the visualizations that you will see on the website.
The biggest problem we encountered while doing this project was the sheer size of the Old Testament. In the King James Version that we used, there are 39 chapters with several verses that we would have to sort through if we wanted to go deeper and look for more specific data. Because there was so much to read and we were working within a limited time frame, we could not collect all the data that we may have wanted. There is also the issue of translation, as some of the things were originally mentioned in the Old Testament were written in Hebrew and later translated to English. Therefore, some of the translations may be shaky and not mean what the original author intended for it to mean.
Coming into this project, we as researchers expected to see similarities in the occurrence of specific diseases in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Instead, what we found were incredible differences between the diseases that carried over from the Old Testament to the New Testament. These differences were completely unexpected. Given that the Old Testament and the New Testament are both part of the Bible, we were expecting to see a lot of overlap between the kinds of diseases that occurred in the two books. For example, we saw several cases of leprosy occurring in the Old Testament. When we looked at the New Testament, we only saw a few, maybe two. Instead, what we saw was that only 3 of the specific diseases that we recorded occurred in the Old Testament and the New Testament. The rest of them could only be found in only one book or the other.
By looking at the visualizations of our data, we were able to see right away that there are more mentions of the disease in the Old Testament compared to the New Testament. The red symbolizing the Old Testament and the blue symbolizing the New Testament. 63 of our data points came from the Old Testament, while only 27 came from the New. However, there's a lot of variation in the kinds of diseases that appear in the Bible. For example, we see way more mentions of leprosy in the Old Testament, and the only mentions of epilepsy come in the New Testament.
When we look at the supposed causes of biblical diseases, we see a lot of variation in the causes of said diseases. Some illnesses are thought to have developed naturally, such as infertility. However, we see some diseases that are thought to have come from divine sources. For example, epilepsy was thought to have been caused by demons and even Satan himself. Some diseases were thought to have been caused by angels, while others came from God. When we look at the distribution of the causes of disease between the New Testament and the Old Testament, we see that the majority of cases involve natural diseases. In the Old Testament, we see more diseases being considered threats by God. In the New Testament, we see more cases of diseases being caused by angels, and then Satan and his demons.